Giant City State Park. My name is Jennifer Randolph-Bollinger, and I am the Park Natural Resources Coordinator, which again is just a fancy way of saying the Park Nature Nerd. Today we're really lucky to have the fabulous Chris Evans here from the University of Illinois Extension, and Chris is an extension forester. Chris, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do for U of I?
Sure, thanks Jennifer. So an extension forester, we basically do education, outreach, training to the people of Illinois, whether it's landowners, just interested citizens, trying to help them figure out the best way to manage their land, to keep their forest healthy. So I'll do a lot of plant ID and management stuff.
Great. We are very lucky to have Chris here because Chris knows a lot about a lot of things. So today he's going to be doing a fern hike, and we also have Jessica Donvito, who is an SIUC forestry student and who is a conservation worker here at the park. So let's go out, let's hit the 1 mile Trillium Trail, and we're going to learn a little bit about ferns today. So come on, let's go.
So let's use this first fern that we're going to look at as a good example to talk about fern terminology in general. So with ferns, this whole part is called the frond. So we don't call them leaves or stems. It's really everything. This part is the frond. And then on some ferns, they have little dissected sections like this. Those are called the pinnae. If we have a fern that is cut up and dissected even more, each little dissection is called a pinnule. So that gets kind of complicated. But this is Christmas fern, and so Christmas fern is one that has, each frond has separate pinnae like this. Other terminology, if you flip this over on this fern, you can see all that little rusty red stuff there. So this is all made up of tiny little spore-producing parts called sori. So each one of those sori on the bottom of this produces the spores, which is how this plant reproduces. So that's the sori, and then the pinnae and the whole frond. The little thing in the middle of this, between all the pinnae, is called the rachis. So Christmas fern is probably the most common fern we have in southern Illinois. They call it Christmas fern because it is an evergreen fern. It'll stay green throughout much of the winter. And this is the one that a lot of people know from the spring when the new fronds come out. They have that fiddlehead. Have you seen that, where it's tight spiral? It's an interesting one in that if you look at the underside of it, only the outer third or quarter of each frond has the sori, the little fertile parts on it. The rest of it doesn't. So when you flip it over and see that, the top of the plant will have that little rusty red stuff, and then the rest doesn't. And then later in the season, when these get mature, the top of the plant will be crinkled or even rolled, and it'll look kind of weird, and that really stands out when you see it later in the summer or in the fall. But Christmas fern, probably in every acre of woods in southern Illinois. All right. So that's a very neat one, most common fern. And hey, back over here is, I'm excited to see because usually this fern kind of fades away in the spring, but we have a little bit left. So this is fragile fern. So let's take a look at that one. So fragile fern, again, is a spring fern. It comes out pretty early. You'll see it with the spring wildflowers at the same time, and it has a tight little fiddlehead when it comes up. It's one that actually does form these kind of big mats on the ground, so you'll see huge patches of it. But it's easy to identify. It's very, very kind of delicate, very heavily dissected pinnae, as you can see on here. And then a small fern, usually lasts until midsummer or so before it kind of dies back or senesces for the year. Happy to find this fern. This is one that I don't see a lot of, but you'll find it sometimes in kind of wetter areas like we're in right now. But this is sensitive fern. Neat plant. It's one of our bigger ferns. This one, we can't see it right now, but the neat thing about this fern is it actually separates its fertile fronds, which are the fronds that have the sori and produce the spores, from its sterile fronds. These are all sterile fronds on this one, right? There's no sori whatsoever. When it does produce its fertile fronds, they'll come separate right out of the ground, and they'll kind of look like this really tight little cluster of little balls hanging on the top of it there, and it really looks kind of neat, sticking up and really different. This one is a little interesting where, again, this whole thing is a frond, and then each of these pinnae are kind of serrated like this, and that's called pinnatifid for these. But for sensitive fern, you know, you're going to find this bigger fern with these really serrated looking pinnae like this. And if you look closely right at the rachis, there's actually a little bit of tissue on it right there. It kind of sticks out. So this is a really neat one. I like it because it grows on rocks. You almost never see this plant growing on the dirt or on trees. It's almost always kind of on sandstone rocks. So this is Virginia polypody, which is kind of a cool name, right? But it is one that forms these big mats, so they're all kind of connected, you know, through roots and spreading rhizomes. But a smaller fern, you see there's not, the fronds aren't very big. The neat thing about them is if you flip it over, they have sori, you can see in there, all these little round dots, right? Just almost perfectly round little dots on them like that. These are not really mature yet, so when they mature, they'll kind of get bigger and you'll see the rustiness of them like that. But yeah, kind of a neat fern. I'm guessing one of the reasons why this whole area is called Fern Rocks, because there's a lot of this and other ferns growing right on the rocks around here.
Oh, hey, look, it's polygon.
Yeah. Oh, that's neat. So this is the one that we saw it down there that had kind of immature green sori. This one has them sori that are already mature. You see that? They're all rusty kind of colored and they're rolled up. So this fern's a little farther along than the last one.
Cool.
And then the nice thing is right here we have our next fern, which is the other fern, why this place is called Fern Rocks. So this is one of the shield ferns. And so shield ferns, there's a couple different species. They will grow on rocks and on dirt. So you kind of find them in both places. But here at the Trillium Trail in the Fern Rocks Nature Preserve, they're all over. All these rocks, the cliffs around here are covered in this fern. It's a neat fern. They call it, this one is marginal shield fern, and they call it marginal shield fern. So if you look at the underside, the little sori are right on the margins of each of those pinnae, right at the edge. And that is one way to tell the different shield ferns apart. Some of them are not at the edge and some of them are, but this is the marginal one, so the one that's right at the edge. And their sori are pretty neat. If you look at them really close, it looks like a little snail shell, or kind of like a little curve like that. Really a neat looking fern, a bigger fern. The shield ferns, this one has not really many serrations. It's kind of smooth along the edge. And if we see one of the other ones, you'll see it's very different. They're kind of heavily serrated. This is one of our common ferns around. It's called lady fern. And I guess they call it lady fern because it's a delicate kind of looking fern. I really have no idea why they call it that. But, you know, it's a nice fern. A lot of times some of them will have kind of a wine-colored or purplish midrib or rachis, on it. But, you know, a beautiful fern. It also has those sickle-shaped sori on them as well. But you'll find this a lot on the Trillium Trail. So here's a little tiny example of bulblet fern. I really like this fern because it has this way of, it produces these little tiny bulbs. You see one hanging down there, and it spreads that way and it produces spores. But this is a close relative of the fragile fern we looked at, but this one really only grows on rocks. And you find it in a couple places along the Trillium Trail. Really not that common of a fern. So hidden amongst all these fragile ferns we see around is our next fern, which is ebony spleenwort. Ebony spleenwort has a kind of cool name. They call it that because the stem, the rachis that goes up the middle, is dark black. It looks a little like Christmas fern, but if you flip it over, if we remember, Christmas fern has those really like clusters of rusty red sori just at the end. All of these little pinnae have kind of sickle-shaped sori all along it, so it looks a little different and it doesn't get as big. Pretty common fern. You'll find it growing on trees, ground, and rocks around. This is probably one of I think, the prettiest ferns out there. It's northern maidenhair, and it has this kind of halo or ring of vegetation around, so they all kind of form this little hook like that. And each little pinnae on it has a smooth side and then a ragged side. It has these really thin little dark black rachis and stems. It really is a beautiful fern. But if you look at the underside, this one has a really unique location for its sori. They're only right at the edge. So you see those little windows right there, little curls. That's where the sori are produced. But then it's only on that ragged side of each pinnae. So there's the smooth side and then the ragged side, and it's only there. So most people don't even recognize that it even has that because it's kind of hidden in there. But probably our most delicate, one of our most beautiful ferns. Really indicative of high quality, rich nutrient-rich sites. So this fern probably has one of the coolest names out there. This is Pinnatifant spleenwort. Grows on rocks. It's actually a pretty rare fern. This is the only location that I know of it in Giant City State Park, is here on this rock along the Trillium Trail. But they call it Pinnatifant spleenwort because if you look at the fronds and they come out, they have, it's dissected, but not dissected all the way down to the middle stem, the rachis, and that's called pinnatifant. And so it has these long fronds with kind of this wobbly, curvy indentions along the edge. Really, really neat one, and you'll only find this one in southern Illinois growing on kind of high quality sandstone sites. Pretty cool fern. A great fern to end on. This is probably my favorite fern of all in southern Illinois. This is walking fern. It's another one of those spleenworts. So we saw the Pinnatifant spleenwort up there, then the ebony spleenwort. This is another one. It has these really, really long fronds. Really tapers into this long point, and they call it walking fern because when the tip of this point kind of touches back onto the rock or any kind of vegetation, it'll actually form a whole new plant and then re-root. So it kind of walks by moving from plant to plant like that. It does have spores, but that's how it kind of forms these big mats like we're seeing here. Really a cool fern. Not very common at all, really only in high quality sites on sandstone.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this fern hike at Giant City State Park on the Trillium Trail. I'd like to thank our guide, Chris Evans, for coming out, and Jessica. I hope you all enjoyed this, and